Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on the program tonight, we welcome back our returning champion, Jay Watts. Jay used to be the central organizer of the Communist Party of Canada. He's for the past several years, he's been based in Mexico. He is based in Mexico, and he's been part of Mexico Solidarity. And we're here to talk about Mexico. And if enough time, we might be talking about broader issues like the problems with the left, Latin America in general. So this is our All Things Latin America edition, and it's our the Jay Watts experience. So, so first off, Jay, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Nice to talk to you again. I should have revisited the last conversations we had because I think they might probably be a slightly different take on certain things now, but
Oh well,
but we'll
hey,
see.
that's exactly why I wanted to have you over, and of course, the breaking news over over the weekend, and this is one of the reasons why I was like, okay, dude, you have to come on like the show, is because you're actually stepping down formally from being one of the editors of the website of Mexico Solidarity. You still will be doing Mexico Solidarity work. You are frontline activists and whatnot, but you won't be. Yeah. Well, explain to our audience like what is going on with
Yeah,
you.
sure. I'm the editor currently finishing up of MexicoSolidarity.com, which is full name is Mexico Solidarity Media. It's a project from the Mexico Solidarity Project, which is a tri-country Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., although primarily Mexico and the U.S. organization devoted to solidarity with Mexico, sort of with a critical support for the fourth transformation. So I've been the editor since a couple of years, but more in a full time capacity since the beginning of last year. And so basically, it started as sort of like media criticism site. There was a lot of stuff coming out about AMLO was a narco president, blah blah blah, stuff from the New York Times and ProPublica that was pretty unsubstantiated and garbage. So the idea was to have somewhere where people could analyze, people who knew what was going on in Mexico could analyze and respond to that sort of stuff. And although there's a lot of garbage about Mexico, there's not enough necessarily to keep a website going every day. So we moved to a model that was more about Mexico news from a left perspective, or things that people might be interested in. So that involves interviews, video, photography, articles that we do, but as well, a large component was translating pieces from Mexican left news or of interest to people looking at the Mexican left. And this is just the project itself, sort of to give people an idea of what's happening in Mexico. So within the governmental process, which is the fourth transformation, Morena, which has been in power since 2018 when AMLO came in, and now under President Sheinbaum. But also the extra sort of Morena left, which would include the various communist organizations or trade unions or civil society organizations, other parties, left organizations, because there's a lot of stuff obviously that's still contested within that. So that's where the site landed. I was hired to do just a little bit, and then they extended it. But one thing is that uh, getting to see how the sausage is made is made me a little. Well, I would say I had a very I had the privilege of following Mexico news very intensely every day, all week, 50, 60 hours a week, kind of like looking through stuff and stuff, and getting a good view of sort of what's happening in Mexico in the left. Obviously not everywhere, and it's very Mexico City centric, but of how the Morena transformation has progressed, how has it stagnated, what's going on. And I'm trying to think back to our original conversation. It was definitely a little more boisterous about the possibility. And this year, well, last year, I started sort of having doubts about the party itself and the processes, and always understanding the role that the U.S. imperialism plays. But so earlier this year, I decided that I'd wait until the assembly that Mexico Solidarity Project had, and then work on that, and then quit. So I quit, and then they asked me to stay on for another month to handle sort of like the transition then. So somebody else will be taking it over. But I'm primarily leaving just because I would say the critical element of critical support for Morena and the transformation has vastly grown. I've tried to sort of think about, okay, is this just because it's always been this way and I'm spending more time looking at what's happening, or is there a serious break in the direction that the government is going? What's happening? I think a very significant issue for me is that I believe President Sheinbaum fully, and she says this, fully believes in integration with the United States. I don't think that's compatible at all. Not in the best of times, but certainly not under Trump. That's not
Exactly.
compatible with an idea of Mexican sovereignty. So I've always tried to think, does she actually believe that this is possible? Is there something crappy and underhanded going on? Like what's basically I came to the idea that it's nothing that I want to support, that the Mexico Solidarity Project has as is their right, a more positive view of what's happening, and they should continue that work. That's fine. I'm friendly with all of them and stuff like that. But for me, I think that I want to put my political energy somewhere else, because I don't there's certain things that I don't see compatible with my own beliefs and with what I maybe naively assumed would be the project of the fourth transformation of Morena, which was to expand Mexican sovereignty, to ideally start looking more at Latin American integration. Unfortunately, these things seem to be out of sync with what's left of the pink tide in terms of state power in Latin America and the Caribbean. But that's sort of that sort of belief, that late 2000s, early 2010s kind of thing, is how I got into Latin American solidarity, and it's still what I believe. So I'll be going forward and trying to find somewhere else to put my political energy. But for now, I'm it's not. I don't see the. Yeah, I don't see that Morena itself as a governing party, and certainly not the remainder of the Scheinbaum term, will involve what I would say it's going to be, obviously, and still is, targeted by imperialism, and it's important to stand up to that. But I think that there's a sort of an integrationist push, a very significant integrationist push, which also is coinciding with, I would say, Scheinbaum's own internal neoliberal politics. She does have a sort of neoliberal tinge to how she approaches things, more so, I would say, than Scheinbaum, or sorry, than AMLO. And so, God bless them, but that's not what I want.
Interesting.
And, yeah,
The first time, the first two times, no, the first three times, I think. So if memory serves me well, now the first time we had you on was to talk about, in general, it was to talk about Mexican history and the current affairs of Mexico. AMLO was just on his way out, and you
yeah,
more or less gave us a pretty positive, critical leftist perspective on his legacy. And then we had you on because just as he was getting out the door, he had a very good radical policy, which was electing judges, electing
yeah.
electing judges, which he was successful in. The far right turds of Mexico and their AstroTurf backers did not win that one, thank God. And then we were looking at, and then I think either on that episode or in the later episode, we were talking about Claudia Scheinbaum's first 100 days,
Mhm.
and she more or less was continuing and expanding some of the positive policies that AMLO had done, and she still is trying to advance a lot of those policies. But, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Like now, to our audiences and to our comrades, we're not being critical for the sake of being critical. I think you and I, we would never ever. I mean, as much as we are on the far left and probably further left than like a lot of our comrades, I don't think that you and I were critical just for the sake of being critical and look how lefty I am, f all of you guys and so forth like that. But that but all that being said, look, Lula I think I think wants to do a lot of good for the people of Brazil, and he does often have to fight with two hands tied behind his back and whatnot. But sometimes he does things in which no one's pointing a gun to his head. He just has done a stupid thing, like supporting American imperialism, pan-European imperialism in Haiti, and continues to do that. And Sheinbaum is also, I think, very much like that. So while she talks sometimes a good game about sovereignty for Latin America, the U.S. shouldn't be doing this to Venezuela, the U.S. shouldn't be doing that to Cuba, and what Israel is doing is very mean to the Palestinians, she still does not go all the way forward, and that's just do like full on BDS, or at least like say like I'm going to do like an arms embargo, or guys get the beep out of our country. We're no longer going to have your ambassadors, you Israeli ambassadors are no longer going to have free reign, and then props up two-state solution, Palestinian state, blah blah blah, 1967 borders, and so forth like that, and I also when looking at left-wing coverage, critical leftist, anti-imperialist, or at the best left-leaning coverage of international relations and so forth like that, I know for a fact I've grown somewhat bored with the whole multipolarity is going to save us. China and Russia, they really are playing a really smart secret games behind the scenes, and they really are going to lead us into a world of where Western imperialism is going to be yesteryear, and all of y'all just have to be very patient. And guys, stop criticizing China and Russia when they do on just its face bad policies. And I'll just say one more thing before we go back to Mexico is just on the issue of historic Palestine and the plight of the Palestinians in historic Palestine and in so-called Israel, Zionist entity, whatever people want to call it. Now, Russia, like a lot of people, say like how come Russia isn't more aggressive towards Israel, given Israel is completely aligned with the West, blah 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 blah, and so forth. And you just have to, and I just have to like remind people, well, look at the demographics. Russia has a huge Zionist community. Many of those people are in Israel. Many of those people are in Israel and have dual citizenship. So why Putin doesn't, go full BDS on Israel? Okay, that's his excuse. Just like it's the excuse, like why, why can't our Western leaders be more critical of Israel? It's because we have a huge Zionist, communities with their Zionist lobbies, and then Israel itself is aligned with the West. Now, when it comes to a country like China, there's really no excuse why China still has relations with Israel, and why China doesn't just do full BDS on Israel. And I think even Japan and South Korea, if they wanted to, they could also do forms of like BDS on Israel, because their own population is all overwhelmingly for this, for Palestinian liberation and so forth. But the more I keep doing research into historic Palestine, the more I'm just very depressed and like and angry, because clearly, like I assume, oh, everybody's for the democratic, secular, one-state solution, and that's what BDS is all about. That's what the demands of BDS is all about. If you look at Palestinian civil society and you watch Electronic Intifada and so forth, but actually, when you really, really read the fine print of even the best of the left, the best of the Palestinian left and so forth, you realize, I think I'm completely speaking a different language. They're completely speaking a different language. And no, we're not all on the same wavelength when it comes to what even Palestinian liberation means, what that even like requires and so forth. And long story short, like I believe like I'm an advocate of full-on BDS, democratic, secular, one-state solution. And if Israel won't accept it, can't accept it, well, then, like the settler colonialists, the Pied Noir of Algeria, you're free to move. But many other people, but many other people, including folks who do advocate BDS, I think are talking a completely different language. And they say things like, "Oh, we want to return to 1967 borders," and then polls in Gaza and the West Bank, most of the inhabitants there also are still propping up the two-state delusion, and that's because of the PLO. That's because of Hamas itself. That's because we in the West, and that even includes the best of the Palestinian diaspora, I think are just not being honest, and I think we all have just it's just one of those things where we all think we're on the same side because we're all going to humongous protests, but really, when you look at the fine prints, there's a lot of things that's just lost in translations, and that's very unfortunate. And then if you do give critical assessments about this, many people kind of get at your throat about that. But that being so all that well, actually, any responses to that before we go back to the topic of Mexico? Actually,
I've had a little bit of experience with this before. I mean, there's always this sort of like excuse, and this is kind of common under certain communist parties, which is that like, look, we're saying a two-state solution with 1967 borders because that's what the Palestinians are saying, not recognizing that historically the Palestine that was forced on the PLO as a condition of support by the Soviet Union during the Gorbachev period. So it's very funny to be like, well, this is the Palestinians who want this, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, whatever. But historically, that was forced upon them. So it's very funny to let this sort of like Gorbachev misstep and mistake dominate like as an excuse somehow now 40 years later. That's all I have to say about that. Obviously I support a democratic one state solution. I mean, but I would hope that everybody understands, or that the common thread through all Palestinian solidarity should be the defeat of Zionist Israel. I think that's I would hope that's the common thing we can all believe in, at least.
Exactly. And so now, as you're stepping away from Mexico solidarity, okay, so let's do the following. Talk to us about some of the ongoing positive things that's happening with Claudia Sheinbaum, and then after that, feel free to talk about where you have critical opinions based on again like what again how you see the sausage being made, where you think it's where it's getting overlooked, and there's a little bit of how do people a self-censorship, if you will, going.
Yeah, so I mean, I think when the last we spoke, yeah, was after Sheinbaum had been in for 100 days and made her big speech at that point. And even like during the initial campaign, or the presidential campaign, when they were picking the candidates, I was more inclined to support Noronha, who was at the time a member of the PT, the Workers' Party here, so the Socialist Party, more from the left. He's kind of shown himself to be a bit of a dink anyway, so not that my not that my political intuition was so strong on that. But I would say I mean, yeah, I want to be very clear. There's substantial good things that are still happening in Mexico that are carrying on from the AMLO period, including AMLO's demands. As we talked about, the judicial reform, the election of judges, I think is very strong, because especially if it allows the Supreme Court to enforce the Constitution as it should. Still a very strong, very progressive social constitution that allows a certain amount of social rights, a large amount of social rights. And so, a more responsive judiciary is a great thing, I think. And obviously there's things like the increase in the minimum wage, which is still very, very, very low. And I will note that Scheinbaum has this year was the smallest increase in terms of a percentage as the previous year. So I think a lot of things you can, not to be reductive, but I would say a lot of the good things that come from Scheinbaum are a continuity with what AMLO had established. So including passenger rail, for example, a rule for the public energy system, things like that. Where it gets a little trickier is things like the move towards a 40-hour work week, which is to be done by 2030. She basically implemented the same very slow, loophole heavy thing that no one was demanding. Like all of the proposals for a 40-hour work week previously had stipulated from all parties had stipulated there should be a 2-day weekend. That does not exist in this move towards a 40-hour work week. There's a lot of like openings for abuse by employers, things like that. So it's very similar to what Boric did in Chile, and it's not good.
Ah,
It's so there's a lot of these things that and it took a while. I was trying to figure out, was it always like this under AMLO, and I just wasn't paying close enough attention. I still don't entirely know. I think also AMLO did talk about, for example, integration with the United States, supply chains, things like that. But he was also talked about integrate Latin American economic integration. He had a strong role for CELAC when he was the president of it. There was the Summit of the Americas that happened, and Biden didn't want Cuba, Venezuela, or Nicaragua to participate. He said, "Okay, Mexico's not going to participate. If that's the case, I'm not going to go." Like he stood up for certain things like that. So, but Scheinbaum, I think this is fundamentally it. I think that, and I said this elsewhere before, and I'll say it again. I think that she's probably what you would consider a progressive neoliberal of the European Union variety, or even Canadian to a certain extent, in that she believes in good things, like she wants there to be a healthcare system here. That's good. That's strong. She wants there to be good universal education. That's good. But I think that large elements of, and I'm trying not to judge. I'm trying to judge Morena and the Fourth Transformation on what it stipulated, which is a plan of sovereign national sovereignty and popular development. So this is not socialism, but this would be kind of anti-imperialist. It would have a long, important element of the state power, of reclaiming the ability of the state to work some social element, which existed for decades in various forms under the pre. So judging her on that is where it comes to something when I'm looking at Plan Mexico, which was ostensibly the large industrial policy that she launched last year, which was to bring in investment, but under certain conditions, and develop national economy, et cetera, to turn away Mexico from being a dependent kind of branch plant colony of the United States. That whatever that plan was, which was not fully articulated, that's disappeared. That is not something that she talks. They mentioned Plan Mexico, but what it means is let's get as much foreign investment here as possible, and let's make it as easy as possible for foreign investment to come in because the economy is stagnating. And so we're going to reduce taxes. We're going to give public land away. We're going to do all these things. This is quintessential neoliberal policy. This is what Peña Nieto did when he established a network of special economic zones. And AMLO canceled that. Sheinbaum has revived it, but she calls them polls for well-being. And it's basically the same thing as these special economic zones, is pulling people at demand, asking that people come in, saying, look, we're going to give you big tax breaks. We'll give you support. Even now there's a whole big move to push away from what they call red tape, to basically say, if your project isn't approved, your investment project isn't approved within a certain period, I think it's 30 or 60 days, it's automatically approved. That, I mean, this is like crazy, super neoliberal thing. But they say, well, the justification is that investment is slowing down. The economy is stagnant. Why is the economy stagnant? It's not the economy is stagnant because while Sheinbaum's done this, she's also massively reduced public spending and public infrastructure. So there's still money being spent on important things like these what they call pensions, which is almost like a universal basic income. But those are important things. But when we look at where that money comes from and how it goes out and how it's spent, what happens is that Mexico, there's a gigantic level of informality. That means that almost half of people working have no rights, maybe make below minimum wage, are working in informal conditions, don't pay into the certain social security, other things like that, can't access those services.
very,
Um,
very precarious. It's
yeah,
like poor suffering working class of like Britain, and the precarious middle class. 0-hour contracts bouncing from one low wage
it's
job
it's
to another, or to
way
multiple low-wage job.
It's way worse than anything in Europe, even. I mean, this is 50% of people who work have nothing like that. So, this is the situation that has grown in terms of tax revenues is that the half who do work, who are working class, the burden of taxation is them. Rich people in this country don't pay tax. They don't pay inheritance taxes. They don't do anything like that. The percentage of GDP that the tax receipts make up it's 14 to 15%. This is compared to Brazil, where it's like 30%. The OECD average is like 32, 33 and higher, right? So who's funding? The working class itself is funding its own social programs. The rich are not. So you're kind of moving money around. And when the economy is going well, that's okay. That happens. But when it starts to stagnate and the government starts restricting investment, private investment in this country doesn't come in step into the vacuum, because there's other ways for them to make money. There's including the fact that the central bank has high interest rates still. Am I gonna sit on my money and make a 6% return because I can just do that, or am I gonna invest my money and maybe make a 2% return in 5 years? Obviously, you're gonna sit on the money. So all of these things are how she approaches the economy. It comes a very neoliberal perspective, which is, well, we have to keep on cutting spending. We have to listen to the international rating agencies. We don't want a lot of debt, blah blah blah. So the economy is slowing down, and then when and then her solution is to gather all these neoliberal economists who tell her what to do, which is, well, you've got to keep on doing more of the same, or look for more foreign investment. You've got to do that. You've got to reduce restrictions on them. Just this neoliberal path.
Yeah.
It is very obviously that she's following it, but at the same time, she is doing certain good things like spending money on social housing, or expanding education and healthcare and things like that.
You
But
know, if I actually, if I may interrupt, but okay, so all that being said, and I mean, I don't know Claudia Sheinbaum. I don't know what kind of left wing meetings or gatherings she goes to, but our friends over in Canada recently had a kind of a 2-day conference called "Capitalism Can't Be Fixed." These were all the folks that were part of Eve Engler's efforts to get into the NTP leadership race, and it was a great it's a great manifesto. What the 45 activists who drafted the manifesto for Eve's leadership, capitalism can be fixed, was a very great manifesto. And and when Eve and Bianca were both rejected, not even allowed into the race, Eve went on a speaking tour called "Capitalism Can't Be Fixed: The Failures of Social Democracy." And and over the weekend, I actually was doing some research into Olaf Palme, the Swedish Democrat Prime Minister of uh, of Sweden. God rest his soul. He was really one of the great social democrats. I was looking at his time in office and what made him really butt heads with the Swedish oligarch compared to all the other social democratic prime ministers before him. And then I was looking at Gough Whitlam's very brief tenure when he was in power, Australian Prime Minister of the Labour Party, the last left-leaning leader of the Labour Party before the rise of the new Labour Bob Hawke project, unfortunately. And I was comparing and contrasting, doing some research into them, and the conclusions I came in the end of the day when Palme, when Palme's efforts to give workers way more rights was completely sabotaged and met with such intense hostility to the point where, of course, he was murdered. and I do strongly believe, moi j'accuse, that the U.S., NATO, the Swedish deep state, Israel, and apartheid South Africa all conspired to have him murdered, and I 100% believe that's true, and I am willing to debate anyone who says otherwise. And then when you look at Gough Whitlam, when he was trying to do all of the great sort of anti-imperialist stuff he was trying to do, and just basic socioeconomic policies he was trying to advance, and how much he was sabotaged by the opposition, how much he was sabotaged and met with such hostility by the Australian corporate press and the Australian state press, the ABC, and then just Governor General of answers to the Queen of England at the time just sacks him in this horrendous constitutional coup, and then Palme, when he's when he's dead, the Swedish Social Democrats took a sharp turn to the right, to the socio-economic right, embraced NATO. Now they're formally in NATO and so forth, and just on just so many things, they went to the neoliberalism, whatever you want to call it, and then Gough Whitlam, Bob Hawke, apart from expanding and giving people a single payer of healthcare, it was just the beginning of just like endless austerity on top of endless wars and so forth, and so and again, and the conclusion one has to come to is that's your liberal democracy in a nutshell. And yeah, you can be a social democrat and tweak the system, but there is going to come a point, a real point, where the laws of liberal democracy, in which its central tenet is the free market, is going to say, no, you cannot do this. And if you try to buck with the system, well, we'll find a way to make you resign or murder you. And do you think that is and do you think that is the problem of a Sheinbaum in Mexico, a Lula, and a Delma in Brazil, and similar left leaning folks in Latin America and other places around the
Yes,
world?
yes and no. I mean, the perfidiousness and the tendency to betrayal of social democrats is very is long, and I generally agree with it. I do think, however, and this is how I approached Mexico, and when I think of other Latin American instances too, that because of the role of imperialism, that there is a possibility for social democrats, for left liberals, I guess, and for lack of a better term, to play a progressive role. But I think that needs to that an opposition to imperialism, particularly U.S. imperialism, has to be like front and center. So I don't like. I think that and I think this is what's going to happen. Frankly, is that maybe I'm wrong about Sheinbaum. Maybe she actually believes entirely in a social democratic. Well, I think she does believe in a welfare state of some sorts, but has bigger aspirations from that and just wants to get through the year and is going to institute things. Maybe that's the case. I don't think the U.S. imperialism would ever allow it, frankly. But my support and my hope for Morena for the fourth transformation was based on a broader idea that there would be a move towards less dependency on the United States, not integration in the United States, that it would involve integration with Latin America, trying to create with not just the progressive states, but all of them and the Caribbean, right? Especially for a country like Mexico, which maybe doesn't want to take the risk of saying, okay, well, it can't, that its economy is so integrated, can't necessarily be like, well, there's a lot of people who are like, well, it should just go with China, et cetera, et cetera. I understand obviously why you can't do that. But establishing something like a Latin American bloc that can act collectively allows there to be a sort of division of labor, would allow Mexico to properly, and if it allowed the state a bigger role in the economy, to sort of try to gradually move away from dependency to the United States, from being a branch plant colony of the United States, which is what it is right now. But I don't see that in the government. I see the Secretary of Economy, Marcelo Ebrard, who's responsible for sort of leading the USMCA negotiations, is that 80 to 86% of exports from Mexico go to the US. And by the way, those 88 are majority made by US and European corporations, not Mexican corporations. He thinks it's fucking amazing That's insane. That's like, and that's insane under normal circumstances, especially for somebody from the left. But under these circumstances, which like, and this is getting into a big conflict too, right? Is that I was hesitant, and maybe I still am, to think of that Trump is representing fascism or something like that, or whatever it was. Maybe I was a little hesitant to approve that, but now I'm getting in arguments with people who have thought and do think that Trump is a Nazi, Trump is a fascist, but at the same time want further economic integration with the United States. It does, I don't like, what the fuck is this? Like in my mind, this is like, do people remember like is I made a remark. I called it, well, it's kind of like Vichy Mexico then, right? Which was not well received. So now I sort of say like Anschluss, which is that in 1938 there were Austrian social democrats who, at the height of the Nazi era, were like, well, it makes sense. We should unite with Germany, because they ended up in fucking extermination camps. Like, it's unfathomable, this idea that at the the position that the United States imperialism is right now, you think the proper path is to increase your economic integration with the United States. And yeah, so I mean,
Well,
that's one thing.
and then there's a fair amount of there is just a fair amount of gaslighting. I'm not saying that that left themselves are gaslighting, but for example, when that ghastly wicked witch of West Ukraine and the Western world, Chrystia Freeland, was running for the liberal leadership and was talking about how she's going to take on America. I mean, you were the one during your time at the Communist Party of Canada that exposed that, dude. The official policy of Canada is that we support an America first global, whatever, international affairs and so forth. And then, Mark Carney, for all of his, bullshit talks, how we have to uncouple from America, blah, 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 because America wants to, weaken us and we will never be the 51st state. And, like, even when you read the news badly, even when the fucking corporate media and state media of Canada is reporting on the news badly, it's just one agreement after another where Mark Carney capitulates and does make Canada de facto the 51st state and so forth like that. And we don't even have. And I completely agree with you. For the life of me, I just can never ever understand why all of these left governments of the pink tide, or movements of the pink tide, for all their talk about how, like, we hate the gringos and we need to stand up against Yankee empires and all of their allies, keep throwing Haiti under the bus. I'm never able to understand that. And then it's just, okay, you guys hate, like, okay, like, you guys, like, hate America. You guys want, like, America to stop, like, meddling with your sovereignty. Then why aren't all of you guys ending the drug war and stuff like that? And
Yeah, I mean, I guess
just,
I think
don't
I
know.
think that's a question of like misleadership. And also, I mean, we're coming to, this is sort of probably the what we know as the pink tide ended a long time ago, but we still have the remnants of what people consider the pink tide. But I think that, like, it's very obvious that what was good about the pink tide, the mixture of the sort of reformist governments and the more revolutionary oriented governments, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, I guess we can now point Bolivia more on that side. Was a broad belief in Latin American integration, opposition to U.S. imperialism. That that is not where Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil are right now. That's not where that's not where their leadership is right now. That could be where people are. The leadership is not in that case. In all three of these instances, Petro, Lula, and Sheinbaum, you have a sort of domestic communication strategy, which says that our president at this point is endowed with special powers to whisper to Trump and negotiate special things, and that's why it's not worse. Okay, leaving aside Petro and Lula, The Scheinbaum instance, this brought up all the time domestically, is like, look, we've avoided the worst of the tariffs. They haven't put tariffs on the export of what we export to the United States, with the possible exception here and there of aluminum, steel, tomatoes. Okay, the reason why there's large tariffs on those is because those are owned by Mexican companies. The reason there's no tariffs or small tariffs on the rest of the exports is because those are coming from US corporations who are making stuff here. So, yeah, Trump isn't putting tariffs on US companies that manufacture here and have an insane profit rate by selling shit in the United States. That's not because he loves Mexico. That's because US corporations would get upset. I mean, this comes to how Scheinbaum could have called his bluff on the oil thing, right? With the oil for Cuba. I mean, she quit them even before the tariff threat. But one of the things was there's the tariff threat. Well, then he'll put tariffs. Of course, that would hurt the Mexican economy, but that would hurt U.S. corporate profits, which would is Donald Trump so insistent that he wants to destroy Cuba that he would threaten U.S. corporations as much? I don't think he was, but um, yeah, that's like so where we're at right now is that the three remaining sort of reformist pink tide governments, yeah, have this strategy that we're going to meet with Trump, we'll talk to him man to man, we're going to negotiate certain things like that, and aren't even coordinating with each other on things like Cuba, on things like Venezuela, obviously. But even before that, the minute that Donald Trump was like, I'm going into the Caribbean to fucking murder people from the sky, the immediate response should have been, no, you're not. We're going to pull some diplomatic response. There was no fucking response. The response when they finally started killing people, and these governments don't even talk about it anymore, was, oh, that's bad. The United Nations should do something about this. What the fuck? Like, all of these governments, the whole thing was the Caribbean and Latin America are a zone of peace. The second declaration of Havana, the CELAC conference in 2014 was, we're not going to let war break out. Okay, it already is. You're doing nothing. You did nothing. Okay, so where was the next line? Because that's not saying anything directly led to January 3rd. Right before January 3rd, when Maduro was kidnapped, when the Cubans were murdered, when Caracas was attacked, like 2 days before that, was the first strike on Venezuelan land by the United States. They were obviously testing the entire thing. How would people respond? Foreign Policy magazine, which is considered sort of the brain trust of U.S. imperialism, had a piece which was like, this is the Latin American left. Nobody's responding. We're just walking all over them. Like, they were shocked enough. And then after, like before, Petro, who likes to talk so much, was just before January 3rd, he was, the minute if you attack Venezuela, you're attacking a brother nation. The Colombian army will stand up, blah, blah, blah. Didn't do shit. Within a month, he was off meeting, or a little more after that, was off meeting with Trump, exchanging hats, getting signed signatures, bullshit like this. Same thing happens with Lula all the time. These governments, whatever remains of the pink tide, maybe in their heart they believe that things are so bad and they're going to just carve out a little thing, but they're not being honest about it either. Because this gets to it, right? If I have conversations with people about why Scheinbaum lied, first of all, and doesn't send oil to Cuba, while she keeps on lying, they say, well, Trump could invade, Trump could do all that. Of course he could. Well, then you should tell us at least a basic fundamental thing that we should agree on for left-wing governments. They don't lie, or if they do lie, it's for very good reasons, but they try to give a realistic assessment of where Mexico is at. I would have a lot more respect for Scheinbaum if she said, we can't do this. I want to do it, but the US told me they're going to do this and this and this, and I've decided I'm not going
Well,
to do it. I'm sorry.
well,
And
another
but
thing.
then try to work for some other way. So I mean, the whole thing is she's sending humanitarian aid. This is to manage the Morena base, which is upset because of she's broken a historical promise that AMLO made to Cuba to continue selling or sending oil, and a historical relationship that Mexico, even under neoliberal governments, did. So, yeah. Anyways,
But I think it also, but one thing that annoyed me observing, all of these, supposed pro NDP critical leftists and their, stupid outlets like Rabble Babble and the Breach or the Leech or the, you know, or whatever is one thing that really annoyed me with their hostility towards Eve and the smearing and the slander was that, geez, these people don't even have like the courage of their own convictions, and that's what I see sometimes, like in Latin America. Oh, like Venezuela is a democratic socialist government to the core. Same with the Sandinista government led by Daniel Ortega, and to see, I mean, it was bad enough when Gabriel Boric was like trying to be like this kind of like Bernie Sanders sort of person who's like, I'm a socialist, but I'm not a socialist like Cuba. I'm not a socialist like Nicaragua. Not a socialist like Venezuela. It's like, okay, well, they're also democratic socialist governments like yourselves, asshole. And then like to like see like Petro like 1 month it's he's all detente with Venezuela, like we're kindred spirits and so forth, and then it's back to like, oh, Maduro should have elections again, and Lula was also doing the same thing, and it's like, come on, don't you guys have like the courage of your own convictions? Like goddamn, like have an argument with those douchebags of like your far right corporate media outlets or even your state media outlets, and there's just like none of that, and then like, I mean, it's frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, the big question is like what comes next after the pink tide and this sort of thing, right? Or if there is anything next, if the US imperialism has decided that the Western hemisphere is theirs for sure, and we're going to take it no matter what, which I would say is not a Republican idea or just a Trump idea, is the US imperialist idea.
Yep,
So that's
Monroe
a big
Doctrine.
question of
The
what
Monroe
next.
Doctrine is as old as Manifest Destiny.
Yeah. So, but I think 2026 is a very pivotal moment just to bring it back to Mexico a bit for a number of reasons. Number one, I would say is the USMCA renegotiation, which, to my view and the little that's leaked out, indicates that the US is asking for substantial concessions from Mexico, and almost probably not even guaranteeing that it's going to be for 4 years, but they're going to review it every year to change it more. These are things that could strike at the very heart of the continuation of AMLO's project with Sheinbaum. That is still things that are continued. I think it's super dangerous. I think that it's very unfortunate. There's some sectors within the Mexican left, within the farmers, things like that are kind of paying attention to it. I don't think enough people are. Because people don't really know what they're discussing. First of all, there was supposed to be, whether they were detailed or not, there were supposed to be some meetings basically with different civil society groups, unions, et cetera, with the government to talk about what was going to happen, what they might want to see out of a new USMCA. The government canceled all of those. No one knows. So that's a very important thing. And also because that's one of the issues that's been going on here is these rotating sort of national farmer strikes, right? Is that the USMCA, NAFTA before basically destroyed a huge amount of Mexican agriculture. USMCA is continuing to do that. That a lot of production here, 60% of corn production, for example, comes from these medium producers. Other basic grains and stuff like that. They're competing with the United States farmers, who corn farmers receive $5 billion in subsidies every year. Other ones receive, they're competing with the United States in ostensibly a free market, but Mexico doesn't have the capacity to subsidize farmers like that. This
Yeah,
gets to another thing, right? This EU deal. There's very little critical analysis right now of this EU deal, which is sort of modifying elements of an agreement that was um, made in the neoliberal period. Basically, the European Union very quickly made it like it takes effect kind of immediately, and then we kind of sign in a little later. But one of the things in that is that it reduces tariffs for agricultural imports from Europe, and And if you know anything about Europe, you know that European farmers are subsidized also an incredible amount, $80 billion a year from the European Union. This doesn't include subsidies from national governments. Now, so Mexican farmers are going to have to compete with not only U.S. imports, but subsidized imports, but now European subsidized imports. And what it's and okay, but they can export to Europe. Well, there's only a few maybe fruits and certain things like chocolate, things like vanilla or whatever that are going to be there. The vast majority of Mexican agriculture is not that. The vast majority, which and what's going to happen is the ability of Mexico to produce for its own consumption is going to be rapidly destroyed. I don't know. This was one big thing that AMLO had talked about, the 4T had talked about was preserving and securing Mexican food sovereignty. To my mind, they've totally given up on that. There's a smaller program called Sembrando Vida, which is for very small producers, a number of them. It's helpful, but it's this is one thing that comes when you say for the good of all the poor first, which is an AMLO thing. That sounds very good. That is good. But if you don't take care of these medium producers in whatever way, if they get wiped off, how does Mexico feed themselves? You can't compete with the imports that are coming from the US and that
And
are
then with
coming
that,
from
and then with that comes the ongoing vicious cycle of folks who go to the U.S. in the hopes of a better life, get that American dream, and then the stupid ongoing crisis of like undocumented people, and then of course the like build a wall folks, and let's shoot any illegals that come across the borders, and all that just nonsense that goes on in the U.S. about how we need immigration reform, where there is no immigration reform, and it's just like everybody takes turns like exploiting the poor, impoverished, Mexican working class, and on and on and on and on it goes.
yeah. And the other element too is the increasing pressure that the US imperialism has in directly intervening in Mexican politics against the Fourth Transformation, against Morena governments, as we can see with the sort of CIA kind of stuff. But you also have the thing here is that when AMLO was president, he paused relations with the U.S. and Canada both because the ambassadors had criticized judicial reform. Under Scheinbaum, the U.S. ambassador Ronald Johnson, who was a former fucking Green Beret and CIA operative, like a murderous Nazi, has done a lot more. There's been no pause. There's been nothing. Scheinbaum keeps on talking about how this relationship is one of cooperation, not subjugation. I mean, anybody can see this is fucking bullshit. Anybody can see the U.S. is calling shots, and when it can't call shots, it starts pushing more. So what happened recently was that in Chihuahua, a northern state, the CIA agents basically died in an accident, or we think they died in an accident. CIA agent that they were operating here without permission. It's obviously became a big scandal. Uh, Ronald Johnson, the U.S. ambassador, right away was, oh, we think about them. They were connected to the embassy. Obviously, they were operating. The United States was pulling some shit under the guise of drug war stuff. They were pulling it illegally according to the Mexican Constitution. The way that Morena and Scheinbaum have managed this has been to focus on the governor of Chihuahua, who's from the PAN, for the right wing. There are 2027 elections coming up to turn it into a thing. Well, we've got to get this governor out. She's collaborating with the CIA, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But it's been difficult, right? Because the idea has been like, what was really wrong is not that the CIA was acting in Mexico at all, but that it was acting without permission. And so, what you would normally think is the CIA shouldn't have anything to do with in Mexico. But now it's become, well, I mean, they should have permission to operate here. Frankly, I don't think the CIA should operate anywhere. Whatever. Okay, I'm not a citizen here. If you think that, I
Exactly.
think most Mexicans probably don't want the CIA operating here. But they've turned it in, so now to manage it, it has become a sort of drama between the Chihuahua governor, the attorney general who's looking into it, and pushing towards the 2027 elections. I understand that, but I think you're getting into a weird situation where you're pretending that Mexico is exercising this sort of sovereignty in regard to its relationship with the United States, which it doesn't really have. And it got into issues too, because when Sheinbaum started getting upset about this, the US then pulled indictments against the governor of Sinaloa and other politicians from Morena, saying you've got to extradite him to the United States. We think he's some sort of drug lord or connected with cartels, et cetera, et cetera. So now that's a whole thing. Now and it's coming into this situation because last year in October, Mexican cooperation with the United States involved them expelling, not extraditing, expelling up to 96 or so people, including some who were already in prison, to the United States under very like quasi legality. And now they're saying that, well, they've put themselves in this own circumstance. You were very happy to boot out people and having the Harfuch, the security secretary, say, well, we couldn't guarantee that they weren't operating things outside of within the Mexican prisons, so it's better if they're in the US. I mean, this is insane. To say you're basically saying we can't run our own prisons, so we've got to send people to the US. That is like that's not that's I don't know why you would say that, and I don't know why you would do that because you want to keep on the US's good side, blah 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 blah. But it's obviously that this is not the relationship between the Mexico and the U.S. is one of subjugation. It is not one of cooperation, and so you have these two things where it's always the president says this, that's not the reality. The sort of intellectuals and press that supports Morena then has to say, well, she can't actually do what she says because the U.S. is there. Blah blah blah. Okay, I'm from Canada. I heard that my entire fucking life. If you want to say there's no hope for real sovereignty, we just got to do little bits of things. Okay, fine, but I don't agree with that. I don't think that's true. That's not the world I want to live in. And if that's the reality, then let's figure out what does that mean? Is that we're just going to be absorbed by the United States and then we've got to figure out how to do stuff within that? Okay, let's be honest about it. But yeah, I don't. So this year is I think there's a lot happening and there's a lot coming to it, and I don't know if it's always even reflected in Mexican journalism, Mexican media, which can be pretty good, honestly, better than the United States and better in Canada.
Yeah. But this then goes to the heart of the matter. Now, I don't want to talk about all of the very polarizing debates about on Venezuela. Is Delcy, has she been groomed for this job to be a traitor and sell the Venezuelans out to the Yankees and their pan-European allies? I don't want to get into that, but I do have to say the following about Alex Saab, who's been re-extradited to the United States. Whether there is some kernel of truth, and whether he is guilty of whatever he is accused of, it should be in a Venezuelan court. Sending him to the U.S., Delcy, I think, hoping that she's not a traitor, who cares, but she did an own goal. She did an own goal because now Alex Saab, who has already been tortured and everything you can imagine when he was in a U.S. prison, he's going. The U.S. is going to coerce him. He is definitely going to say what the U.S. wants to hear, that Maduro is this non-existent drug lord along with his wife. Ergo, we're never sending this mother effer back to your country, Venezuela. Suck on that. Give us our oil before we bomb you again.
Yeah, I mean, Saab was like,
I just don't understand how some people don't get that. And this goes back to what you were saying, where some people are like, why in this point in time, why would you want to be more integrated with the United States under this one of the most far right reactionary and walking idiocy that is the Trump administration?
yeah, I think like quickly with Venezuela, there's two issues before Delcy and Saab and stuff like that. The first, obviously, is U.S. imperialism's attack on Venezuela as part of a larger attack on all sovereignty within the Western Hemisphere. The second thing is the inability of Latin American progressive governments to stand up for Venezuela. Lula, Petro, Sheinbaum, who, when Maduro was arrested, was like, "Well, I hope he gets a fair trial." Fucking crazy. Um, and then the third thing then is how Venezuela like operates and what's happening there as well. And I think the Saab thing is yeah, I mean it's that's another instance, right? Like they're extraditing him, or they're just sent, like I guess they expelled him, they didn't extradite him, sent him to the US, just like Mexico sent all these people. And these people can be used, and probably, and in Mexico's case are being used against like the government that expelled these people. Like yeah, I don't like that's a very basic thing with Saab. And what's Saab's already being tortured. What's his? I mean, if I was that guy, if anybody was that guy, you'd be like, okay, what do I, yeah, I'm gonna say whatever the fuck. I already got tortured. I got
Yeah.
freed. And then you sent me back to get tortured again. Fuck you. I think fuck you. I think one period of torture and like coming out of it is enough. I'm gonna
Well,
get
and
whatever I can out of this.
and also what they did to his family. I mean, they basically ripped up their citizenship and are like, yeah, have fun in Italy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, but I mentioned this once, and this is another thing. I've never been to Venezuela. There's been opportunities to do tourism and things like political tourism, stuff like that. I haven't gone. I've been involved in lots of Venezuelan solidarity. Um, but, I don't know, people are going all the time and stuff like this. But here's the thing. If they would do that to Saab because of maybe the pressures that they have, I'm not going to fucking Venezuela. Frankly, why wouldn't they give up details about political tourists who like end up in their country, right? Like to the if the US wanted or wants to hear something about Go Pink people or things like that, like why wouldn't they do that? They already saw what they did to Saab, and that's maybe that's the position they're in. But yeah, like I wouldn't I wouldn't go to Venezuela right now.
Yeah,
God
no,
bless those who do.
it's crazy. And yeah, no, it's a very sad state of affairs. But then uh, but then then the response, then should the response be now I don't and you know that I don't speak Spanish, I don't speak Portuguese, so I'm not I mean if any so, if the left wants my opinion and stuff like that, I'd be happy to give them advice, be an advisor on this and that. When it comes to the Western left, and that's where I can have some influence, I honestly, I honestly, I I mean, if somebody in the global South was saying, we really need you to, pressure to mobilize your anti-imperialist movements and pressure your government to not do evil and so forth, I honestly don't. I honestly don't really know what to say to the victims of Western imperialism, because at this point in time, there are and I'm not a doom and gloom sort of person, and I think there is way too much pessimism that's constantly being, peddled and so forth. But I can honestly say at this point in time, I'm just I don't have much hope in the Western left getting its shit together and really mobilizing against anti-imperialism. Apart from a few groups that do good mobilization and try not to be so overly so overly critical, but if they are critical, at least they give some constructive criticisms. But it's a bleak period right now. There is still so much social imperialism. There's still so much like imperial blind spots uh, on our left, and then sometimes sometimes, and this is why I have criticisms with people who think that BRICS is going to save us and that multipolarity is going to save us, and then I sometimes also just don't understand why there is such a like extreme hostility when somebody gives some legitimate criticisms. I don't agree with every single language that some of our comrades make, but I also just find like a lot of the very like intense polarizing debates that's going on is just like when I see the discourse going on in the online world, I just think to myself, oh boy, oh boy, like Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's well, it's what we're doing. It's what everybody does. But I think it's like a we talked a little bit off camera about this. It's like a subcultural thing. The Western left, for the most part, is a minority subcultural kind of interest. People get involved in like internet fights and things like that. I think the Palestinian solidarity movement was a high point, obviously, in the United States, especially, and to a lesser extent Canada. It was kind of crushed by state pressure and power. Um, um, but I
And
mean,
some
I
other
don't.
opportunists as well. There's always that enemy with
Yeah, yeah,
the enemy from
yeah, yeah. And so
within
it's
out
moved into like people have moved into sort of like Memdani kind of politics. But I think there's another element too, which is, and I've been guilty of it myself, which is a sort of like anti-imperial geopolitical idea, which is it's almost like a sports following or fandom or something like that. And you get a lot of this. I think this is very, I understand why it happens. I've engaged in it myself. That comes to like the BRICS ideas, or the enthusiasm for China. Now, not just like what China's doing or what it could do, but China as a model, for example. And that, well, and I think for a lot of people, it's I've seen people withdraw from a sort of consideration of the class politics in their own country in order to think just about like, oh, look, China does this, China does this. And that's great. China does a lot of great things. China is obviously a country that if you are a left wing or a socialist government, you can depend on for a lot of things. I think that's great to have that opportunity for financing, for stuff like that. But a lot of people, I think, in our particular subculture of the Western left have now moved into this thing where it's just like, look at China, look at the BRICS to a lesser extent, blah blah blah. This is such a unique opening, et cetera, et cetera. And it's sort of like a fandom or something like that. Like it doesn't
Oh yeah,
really, I don't
well,
know
it's
how
and
it
you know,
impacts.
yeah, and one could even one could even compare it's like religion, where just like China's like infallible, like China's just like so infallible. Why are you guys criticizing China
But that's the thing, is like you don't even.
and then it
Yeah.
gets into again these ridiculous like internet things like, oh, like you're just like a Trots over here. It's like, but I'm not Trotskyist. Oh, you're just like a Western leftist that always has to like shit on like everything. It's like, I'm not trying to. I'm just looking at the facts. It's just like, oh, you just don't understand. It's like, okay, I'm
Yeah,
out.
but I mean that happens a lot here too, and I think I'm guilty of it. Like in terms of Mexico, where people are like, "Well, there's the Chinese path," and maybe there's some truth to be able to follow that. But for what I see, anyways, within how Mexico operates, is that it's not following the Chinese path. The why the Chinese path was able to do what it was able to do was because they had a revolution and liquidated, the bourgeoisie, and then whatever has developed there is firmly under the control of the Communist Party of China, right? That did not happen in Mexico. That maybe that could, I don't know, but but now, I mean, how this government pursues foreign investment is not how the Chinese government looks at foreign investment, or the controls that it remains, the capital controls, control the banking, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a lot of people, like, it's a fantasy. And part of it, as is sports, is like, oh, well, I'm on Team China. This could work. This could work. I think, like, yeah, not to sound too Trotskyite, some people like to go to that because it's less difficult than thinking about the class struggle or the circumstances, or how to actively work against the imperialism of your own country, or that your country is supporting of U.S. imperialism.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. I don't, that's, I have no answers. I only know is that I think for me and for my own politics and what I'm pursuing, is I have to think about where I can help, what organizations I want to work with. And that is that looking beyond the sort of the pink tide 20, 30 year kind of experiment or whatever, to what's next. I would hope it is an anti-imperialist movement that pushes for socialism. I think that's the next step. But at least right now, it's there's no possibility of going on the offensive. So it's about mobilizing a defense against U.S. imperialism, and I think that's going to involve. And it's not necessarily my place to to make these criticisms or questions, but it's going to involve questions about the sort of remaining progressive leadership of the pink tide, of what role it plays. And thank God there's something happening in Bolivia right now, right? Which vindicates, to my mind, Evo Morales, who was accused of being all sorts of sectarian and nasty and power grabbing and stuff like that. But I mean, they've showed they defeated a coup, and now they're going to defeat, it looks like, hopefully, the right wing neoliberal government that conspires with U.S. imperialism. That's hopeful. That's a good, great, hopeful thing, at least, thankfully.
Well, then, we still have some time left, so let me ask then this big question. So going forward, should so going forward, us, in the West, should we just, however frustrating it may be seeing the discourse we see sometimes, and whatever disagreements we may have with such and such on China, such and such on BRICS, such and such on how we should discuss some strategic blunders of left wing government in Mexico, whomever can unseat Malay in Argentina, and whomever the left can unseat, you know pick whomever far right puppet douchebag.
Mm.
Should we just I guess the cliche, keep calm and carry on. We continue to try to mobilize. We continue to try to engage in political education with folks, and we just continue to try to mobilize, galvanize the anti-imperialist movement, regardless of some bad days we'll have, some bad weeks we'll have, where everybody's just like at each other's throats and whatnot, or
I mean, yes, in some sense, we always have to, but I think a really big thing right now, and I think a thing that has to be rethought is the immediate defense of Cuba. I think is hyper important, and I think it's gonna do. It's. I don't have the answers to it, but I don't think that the model of Cuban solidarity that went on before, and I would say specifically with regards to the United States, which is like if we get enough democratic city councils to say the blockade is bad, then the blockade's going to disappear. Like, okay, that's not what's going to happen right now. That the immediate thing is who know something horrible is already happening to Cuba, worse than a lot than it has happened before, and something horrible is coming down. So what are people going to do to stop it? Or how are good people going to interact in some way? I think it's going to demand a lot more than people are capable of, or sorry, and people think they are capable. And organizations had an idea that I think we saw with the Palestinian solidarity movement, which was mobilized at a higher level than Cuban solidarity might be able to. So knowing that you're probably not going to get 50,000 people out on the streets for Cuba, what are you going to do? What can we do? I have no answers. This is a super emergency situation. I think people have to figure that out. And like, if this is what I'm saying, if people honestly think that the United States is now a fascist country, then the hard question is how was fascism defeated before, and what are we going to do? I mean, this comes to a lot of when people ask me about American politics, or I talk to people there who do think it's that they're living under fascism. I'm like, man, I got bad news for you. The German working class was hyper organized under two mass Marxist parties, the KPD and the SPD, and they had massive unions. They got fucking wiped out. Like, and a lot of them then, the ones who were remaining, played a heroic role in the resistance, but Nazism wasn't defeated because the midterms were coming up or something like that, So like, if
yes.
you actually think that Trump is a Nazi, if you think that he's a fascist, and this goes for Mexico too, why are you talking about fucking integration with this fascist country? Why are we talking about any of these things that sort of imagine there's a liberal democratic sphere that we're going to be able to recover and operate and build in again, unless you actually don't think he's fascist? Then so like act like, I don't know, and I'm not the best at this either because I really don't have these answers. But if this is what you think, if we're at this moment, then what are we doing? What can we do? And it's got to be a little more than we keep on building, we keep on organizing, or things like that. Like that's the big question, I think. And so the immediate thing then is, how can we defend Cuba? What can we do? Why, like, if Cuba is attacked in any way, there's lots of U.S. embassies and consulates that for some reason,
Yeah, and are
deep
we
into a
still
genocide, are still
yeah,
fucking standing.
and are we still going to have people who say like I know I know Cuba has some there's legitimate criticisms you can make about Cuba, like are we still going to do this kind of like self McCarthyism stuff, like the Islamic Republic of Iran, all credit to the people themselves, live in the Islamic Republic of Iran, because because you only have to look at the disgusting, pro war, pro imperialist, Zionist, Western bootlicking diaspora, waving flags of like like Israel, saying "Make Iran like a great again," with their pictures of like the Shah and so forth. And there are supposedly leftist, left-leaning people who keep doing a version of, well, I don't want Trump and Israel to invade and bomb my country, but I do support some kind of sanctions. But I don't like how sanctions have a bad impact on the working people of Iran. So, guys, don't unconditionally be an anti-imperialist on the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I'm like, what? What the
Yeah,
shit
yeah,
is this?
yeah, yeah,
Meanwhile, these are the same people who demand total obedience when it comes to like all things Palestine. Like I demand you understand the nuance of Hamas. I demand you understand the nuance of Hezbollah and so forth. It's like, okay, why can't you then do that for the fallen Syrian Arab Republic or with the Islamic Republic of Iran, the axis of resistance? You
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's not, it's, I have no, I have no good answers. I don't know
yeah.
about it, but yeah, I mean, as it was defeated, it was suppressed, but the Palestinian Solidarity Movement at least did show the potential of, a good thing. People got upset about this. They claim that Kamala lost because of Palestine, the Gaza genocide, and I mean, frankly, people who are willing to do that, I think that showed a level of political maturity in terms of the U.S. left, right? That people were like, no, it's a genocide. I'm not going to support this fucking genocidal a party. That I'm not going to support the Democrats. I think that's great. And I think unfortunately now it's just being put in act. Well, we've got to like make the Democrats better, but but yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you think, I think if you think Trump is a fascist, if you think the United States is a fascist government, then probably it's time to like rethink how you approach your work and what's happening in the world. That's
Yeah,
all
well,
that's
there
all
is
I
that.
can say.
Well, there is that problem with the whole. No offense to my comrades who do believe in nonviolence, I would never ever, insult them. But that whole nonviolence dogma, which affects a lot of like Western leftists and anti-imperialists, like you'll have like Chris Hedges, he'll make like this he'll make one of those like self-righteous speech of his where like like I don't I defeat fascists not because like I defeat fascists because like they're fascists or some kind of things like that, and he's all like, yeah, left right alliance.
Yeah, I don't this I mean
And then,
this
and
whole
then like
like
he'll quote Fred Hampton, he'll quote like Malcolm X, and he'll
yeah,
quote like someone who actually was like like that actually like murdered Nazis during like World War II. But he's like, we have to overthrow this capitalist system with violence and so forth. And then there's that. Then there's the anti-communist leftism, which I no longer
yeah.
subscribe to. And Jay, I blame you for that. You corrupted me to to no longer be an anti-communist leftist. That's and the spirit of Michael Parenti and so forth. So there's that issue, but then there's also the issue that I do find where I think people are being way too soft and not understanding the limitations of of BRICS and even the whole concept of multipolarity. Because what is multipolarity? And from China, which and the Chinese are the first to admit that they do have contradictions and they're constantly like grappling with their contradictions. Like okay, like if you're all for ending for spreading socialism and the respect for sovereignty, well you cannot peacefully coexist with America and Western imperialism because look at look at what it's look at what it's look at how that's resulted.
Yeah.
After all that détente that China did, even when Mao was alive, after all that détente, the U.S. is like, oh, we support Uyghur separatism, we support Hong Kong separatism. We're willing to even, support Taiwanese separatism, and doing, and I'm hoping to do a series of interviews on Japanese history and current affairs, Korean, particularly the South, history and current affairs. And what I can honestly say, studying those two countries, and then doing elementary research into the Philippines, and then watching Abby Martin, I saw Earth's Greatest Enemy at the Brussels premiere, and towards the end they talked about the pivot to Asia, the reactionary far right government of Japan, and them just like brutalizing Okinawan resistance to U.S. bases. My conclusion to all of that is that, okay, you know when we support the pivot to Asia, when some on the left talk about China as this rival capitalist, rival imperialist, rival mean country in Africa, what those people do not realize, what they are doing when they recycle that kind of bullshit, is they are supporting the most reactionary, far right corporatist movements in Japan, in South Korea, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and whatnot, and that's why that's why I think like we do have to talk about like the limitations of BRICS and multipolarity, and as well as I also think we need to move beyond anti-communist leftism.
Yeah.
We do also have to really understand that there is no peaceful coexistence with capitalism. We do have to eradicate this this grotesque system of capitalism in all of its forms, and I think until people really wake up and smell the coffee and realize that the Democrats are not your friends, Labour UK, Labour Australia, Labour New Zealand, and even much of the Greens of the world, who told Dr. Jill Stein to drop out of the race and just accept the status quo as it is, and lesser evilism of Joe Biden, or greater evil, as the late Glenn Ford would say. I think until all of that is, stops, it's just going to be, it's always then going to be like an endless like struggle, la lucha continua, and never ever will we ever find like just like a day of like peace. Not as long as Western imperialism exists, as it does, and that system of capitalism, which imperialism is the highest stage of that. So, any final thoughts as we close, Jay?
Yeah, I guess the point I want to make at the end of all of this is that Mexico still is under attack by U.S. imperialism. That whatever concessions, whatever beautiful hopes that people even in this government have for Mexican U.S. cooperation, that doesn't, I don't think there's much of a future for it. So Mexico, like other countries, is going to need support from people within the U.S., right? To say stop fucking with Mexico. And I don't know what's going to look like right now. It's all sort of around uh trying to extradite, indicting and then trying to extradite Morena politicians. There's 2027 elections coming up. We'll see. I mean, this is the case right now, is that the right-wing neoliberal opposition doesn't have really much popular support, but I think that can change a lot, and it can change a lot because the US can play a very strong and negative role. So I guess the important thing is not maybe what I say when I'm talking about the contradictions, which are not doing too well for Mexico, or what China bomb is like or anything like that. The idea isn't that Mexico shouldn't have any support for when it's attacked by U.S. imperialism, which is what's happening. But it is maybe for my own interest to see, okay, what were the possibilities of a reformist socialist government that is under the thumb of U.S. imperialism? Maybe they didn't exist. I still think that there's some more possibilities that could have been done, but I think the contradictions are not uh, ending up in Mexico's favor right now. So I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll
and
see.
also,
We'll see what happens.
yeah, and I'll just say, going forward, maybe this is an idea for a future show, and hopefully, my sleep apnea will be finally,
Mhm.
contained and so forth. That's why I haven't been doing too much shows frequently, except for the Africa series, is because of the struggles that I'm having with sleep apnea. But
Yeah.
for a future episode, we definitely should invite some like-minded comrades who we might have our disagreements with the limitations of a Morena or a Lula, multipolarity, BRICS in China, and really figure out, okay, well, what does our anti-imperialist left movement have to do? And as I always say, a lot of people are doing great work, but man, we gotta step
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
game up. Sometimes even our best isn't enough, and I think we sometimes even have to like punch more above our weights. I think that would be sort of my closing remarks. Well, until then, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One, our all things Mexico edition, our the Jay Watts experience. People talk about Joe Rogan experience. People should check out the playlist, the Jay Watts experience, the Joe Emmetsberg experience, and the Jasmine Pearson experience. Folks, do donate to One Plus One if you can. Do continue to check out the good work of Mexico Solidarity and uh, Sobriania. That's the podcast that's
Yeah. If you think I'm an idiot and you have a more positive view of Morena, I would say still critical though. I think Sobrania is a good place to start. Jose Luis Guerrero Seo is a long time journalist with experience at Truth Out, Telesur, Venezuela Analysis is one of the co-hosts, and Kurt Hackbarth, who's a writer at Jacobin and hosts some other shows down here. I think that's a good like weekly overview to look at stuff within Morena, the progression and stuff, and we'll definitely cover more of the positive elements that I think of the Morena government. So I would highly recommend that. And the website is mexicosolidarity.com, which I'll be the editor of for another week and a half or something like that. But it will continue as well too. So I would recommend you follow that.
and Jay, we hope to have you. We hope to have you back on the program at a later date, and who knows what topic we'll discuss. But I always have endless ideas of what to talk about with you. That's why it's a shame I don't have a huge audience like the Joe Rogan experience, because then we can do 4 hour shows.
Thank you.
But until then, 2 hours a limit or whatever. But anywho, thank you so much, Jay. Folks, again, donate generously to One Plus One, share widely, especially because sometimes Facebook blocks me from sharing. And good night and good luck until then.